and how to improve education and throughout the Commonwealth. And so we like to do a workshop in advance of these Commonwealth meetings that highlights the role of museums in supporting that kind of activity. So this is a workshop we're working on with National Museums of Kenya and UNESCO Regional Office for Eastern Africa and ICOM Kenya as partners to develop this workshop. We're just in the very early stages of planning that. So if you're interested in participating in the workshop or have ideas of things you'd like to make sure we cover, again, please let us know. And I think the last slide is coming. It's just a little bit of information about the Commonwealth Association of Museums. If you're unfamiliar with us, we, like ICOM, we are an international organization, but our focus is within the Commonwealth countries. We're not restricted to that, but in terms of being able to fund people's travel to participate in our workshops and events, we are. We are affiliated with ICOM. We are an accredited Commonwealth organization, and we'd love to hear from you. So there's my email address. Please get in touch if you have any suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing all of that information about the study that you undertook. Unfortunately, the director of the National Museum in Uganda was unable to connect, but she shared her PowerPoint with us. So she asked if I could just go through it for her. So I'm very honored to just quickly present the presentation that was prepared by Mrs. Rose Mwanja, who's the Director General of the Uganda National Museums. Next. So they currently have an education program in Uganda that involves regular school and institutional visits to the museum. They have also traveling exhibitions that go to the regional museums and communities. They have developed 2 virtual reality exhibitions, and they have some online materials that are available, and they also have a university program about understanding heritage. Next. So some of the challenges that the Uganda National Museum saw for distance learning was that a large part of their population is living under the poverty line. Overall, they have a low-tech environment to respond to. There are many private and community museums that will need to be engaged in this, and they have a lack of stable Wi-Fi and connectivity, which is demonstrated by the example today. But some of the opportunities that Uganda saw were that they have high literacy rates, they have very wide use of mobile phones, radio and television, and they have a very strong relationship with the private and the community museums, and also with television and radio companies. Next. Next one, Jinjia. Can you go to the next slide? So her recommendations for the proposal, which UNESCO is going to take what we've learned today and feed it into a regional proposal that we are developing to strengthen distance education in museums in our region. And her recommendations are that we ensure that there's training for the museum staff and the teachers together in this project, and that we also include empowerment of community museums, that we support the development of virtual reality exhibitions, that we develop online teaching such as radio, mobile, buses, trucks, and videos, and that we also ensure that low-tech options are included for students without Wi-Fi access, tablets, or computers. So I think without further ado, I will pass the microphone over to Dr. Noel Luoga. He is the Director General of the National Museums of Tanzania, and we are very honored to have him with us today. You just need to unmute your microphone, please, Dr. Luoga.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Happy to join you in this forum. Well, at the National Museum of Tanzania, we have several educational programs. Some of them are distance learning and others are traditional education programs. For instance, we have guided tours and students' visits to museums. We have libraries that provide space and materials for learning. We have special events that engage various groups in the public, like children fairs, special events for special needs, so children with special needs. We have programs that to explore talents, but we have storytelling programs that are also part of the special events. We have several outreach programs that we often offer, where museum experts can visit to schools and communities. And also we have several awareness programs that we offer through mass media, through radios and videos, TVs. But we also use public workshops to stimulate dialogue. And some of these workshops are being conducted at the museum space, and some of these workshops are being conducted at the public spaces. We use printed materials, video materials, and traditional performances and festivals as well. We do correspondence and consulting with teachers and students from a distance using telephone and emails. So these are just some of the education programs that we do. We face several challenges in the country, like limited public access to the internet and Wi-Fi connections, basically because of high costs. And also in some locations, it's quite difficult to access it due to its availability. We have limited digital and ICT tools at museums and schools as well. This is an issue of funding as well. We have limited skills and capacity and experiences from our staff and learners on how to use these digital tools. We have the absence of digital content, like we have limited digitalized collections and e-learning materials. Museums are also at the periphery position in formal school education systems, so they are considered as supplementary to the formal education system. But we have several opportunities for distance learning, like increased public desire to access technologies such as smartphones. We see an increasing ownership of smartphones today, televisions as well as radio. We have increased the public desire for learning about history, as well as increased urban and rural electrification, and this can enable people to use these digital electrical appliances. Also, there is a political will and the direction towards digitalization. We see most of museums in Tanzania are now directed to use digital in their operations and functions. But there is ongoing dialogue towards competence-based learning, and we think that the public schools, students would wish to visit or to learn more about museums, or to use museums as a formal learning instruments for the competence, or to gain competence in history and heritage. We have also well-established relationships and networks with public schools, school teachers in the community. There is also presence of ICT unit in the museum, and at least modest e-portfolio such as websites. We use social media, different social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram, but also the museum has an e-makumbusho plan. This is a digital plan that we intend to go deeper into digital technologies. But also our staff have basic computer literate, literate actually. They know how to use a basic computer skills. But also we recommend the following toward this project proposal. We need to enhance the development of digital contents, such as digitalized collections. We need to have virtual galleries and interactive games and simulations, as well as online learning materials. Perhaps the proposal could also enhance museums and schools' digital tools, such as learning management systems and web-based communication tools for synchronized live broadcasting. And also we can enhance e-portfolios, such as mobile apps, social media platforms, state-of-the-art websites, but also having interactive applications and e-libraries. The proposal could also enhance museums and the public's access to the internet and Wi-Fi points. At least we could have Wi-Fi all locations in towns, the public could access Wi-Fi. But also we could build the capacity to museum staff and teachers so that they can use digital tools properly. We can have also programs in Swahili and English, as at least to capture some population in Tanzania which speaks Swahili and cannot access English materials. But we can also introduce mobile museum, mobile galleries, and portable museum exhibits. We can also do some lobbying. Perhaps museum should become central part of school curricula and learning. We can also strengthen interactive and learning-based education programs to complement the traditional promotional education programs, because most of our education programs in museums are today promotional or intended to promote the museums to the public. But yes, we can enhance the interactive part of or learning part of these education programs. And lastly, we can enhance the inter-museum online networks for sharing knowledge and experiences within the nation and the regional museums. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That was a really informative presentation. I know the time is limited, so each museum director is doing their best to share as much as they can. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Beryl Ondiek, who's the director of the Seychelles National Museums, and she will now give her presentation. You need to unmute, Beryl.
Hi. Caroline, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you
Hello?
fine, Beryl. We hear you fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Beryl.
Good evening, everyone.
Jinjia, you can advance.
Hello?
Beryl, I muted everyone so we can hear you. So you're the only one with the microphone now.
Okay, I just want to say a big thank you for the opportunity to just present the museum educational program that we are. Hello? Just go ahead. Just go ahead. We are here. Just go ahead.
Okay, I'll just ask maybe Nicole, you can put off your video, and Beryl, you can.
Hello?
Beryl, go ahead.
Beryl, go ahead. You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Beryl, I think you have to unmute your microphone again. There was so much background noise. I think that Jinjia muted everyone maybe. So we need you to unmute your microphone and go ahead and start with your presentation.
Okay, the Seychelles National Museum has been doing so much activities for the for the past 10 years, and we have tried to increase the quality and the amount of activities for the youths and the kids. So the museum are moving the resources to schools, especially those who are very far from town, so that they also can participate in our activities and programs that we offer. So the museum, we also have a museum club that organizes activities for participants during school holidays, and we have seen for the past 5 years that we have so much participants that come to participate in our activities that we organize during school holidays. That is also a way for the parents who doesn't have a place to put their kids during the school holidays. They come to participate in our activities that we organize. We also having a family fun day that we do. We organize every first Saturday of the month, and we have also seen an increase in the number of families that come to this activity. And it is now 2 years that we have launched Skype in the museum. That is a way to interact with students outside the museum through virtual tool. That is for those schools who cannot come to the museum, who are a little bit far from town, and also those who are on the outer islands. But as every situation, we also have some challenges, and one of them is to get the museum educational program to become part of the school curriculum. That is both the private and the state schools, and having Wi-Fi system in all schools, and also, you know, the geography and the time restriction is also a problem for our outreach teachers that to be able to travel to other schools, so that they can be able to visit the museum. So we also have some opportunities for the distance learning. So this is the wide use of modern tech by the population, especially the youngest generation, and also the opportunity to visit the museum virtually through program of Skype in the museum. So our recommendation is to, as there's a lot of demand, and to get to the schools and to the community is a little bit impossible. So we are trying to get some necessary fund to create a multimedia, digital advanced technology classroom to serve schools and community groups, one that will give the museum a national reach. And then the idea is to reach as many schools as possible through the technology through Skype in the museum program. And then also get the museum website up and running so that the appropriate resources will be available to schools that cannot access the museum resources that we have. So that is what the Seychelles National Museum has in general.
Beryl, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sorry you had some technical difficulty to get this on, but now that was a really helpful presentation. And Beryl is going to be, I think, one of our heroes in the region, because I think their museum is going to be one of the first to reopen during the COVID. So I know Beryl's been very busy getting all the signage up in her museum to keep everyone safe when they visit. And I wish you a lot of luck with that, Beryl. So without further ado, I'm very honored to have with us Ambassador Dr. Robert Masozera. He's the Director General of the Institute of National Museums in Rwanda. And I welcome you now. You need to just unmute your mic, and then we will listen to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I would be brief. In Rwanda, we usually educate our public through 4 main education programs. Number 1, it is exhibitions. We organize permanent, temporary, and traveling exhibition. We actually have more than 20,000 objects in our collection, which help us to organize this exhibition both inside and outside the country. We organize also outreach programs. We have 3 main outreach programs. We have one outreach program called Holidays in Museums, which is held each year for students during the long holidays of December. We have another program called Museums in schools and museums in local communities. We actually reach out to our public in their classroom and in their communities. And it is very important to tell you that schools and communities are selected considering those that are geographically isolated in the first place. And these programs helps to strengthen links between museum and communities. We have also cultural festival and events. The most popular are the National Harvest Day, Umuganura celebration. We organize open door days. We organize traditional fashion shows, traditional cuisine, and a very popular parade of Inyambo. Inyambo are the special cows which are trained to parade and dance in honor of the king during the special ceremonies. And lastly, we organize hands-on experience programs which we carry out using our traditional dance ballet, Uganga's ballet, and we have also a center, a traditional training school. But none of these programs is actually an online education program. They are rather on-site international programs. Next slide. So because we don't have yet online program, we said it is high time now to introduce them in our museums. Are there challenges in implementing them? Yes, there are some challenges, but there are also opportunities to help to overcome them. So we have like 1 to 4 challenges. The challenge number 1 is the issue of internet connectivity. Although the connectivity is good in Rwanda, but there are still a substantial rural-urban gap, with the majority of mobile phones, landline, and internet access concentrated in Rwanda's capital, Kigali. The challenge number 2 is the issue of affordability, because most of ICT tools, especially equipments, are expensive for common people. And the issue of digital illiteracy, mainly among young people. The digital literacy is now at less than 10% of the almost the whole population. And the last issue, in our view, which is the most important, is the issue of lack of know-how, the issue of weak capacity of staff responsible for developing distance education programs and users who lack expertise in advanced technologies. But we have also opportunities. Rwanda is one of the best connectivity infrastructure in Africa. The network is very good. 90% of the population has a network, and 95% of Rwanda is actually covered by 4G internet. So the access to computer and smartphone is easy, and the staff of the museums have a very good internet network, website, and also this social media. To access them is okay. So another opportunity is that we have over 60% of our museum visitors are actually the students and youth. And many of them, unfortunately, cannot afford to pay those tools easily. And on the issue of illiteracy, what is good is that the government of Rwanda is implementing a good digital literacy program across the country. And we have in our museum a team of 7 staff in charge of audiovisual outreach and cultural promotion. The last slide, I support the idea of a project aimed at assisting museums in our region to develop this distance education. So what I can recommend for this project is the following. Number 1, it is very important to take into account the specificity of individual countries, because there cannot be one model that suits all countries equally. And number two, it is very important to align all those education programs with the education curriculum at school, because while there is a distinction between museums and formal education institutions, but museums education must really directly supplement them. Number three, instead of starting from the scratch, we think it is very important to assess the existing education program and see if there is a possibility of converting them into distance education. The example here in Rwanda, if we have holidays in the museum, can we convert them to online museum? Can we have digital museum in school? Number four, it is very important to provide adequate training in the development of distance education for museums, because our staff should be able to develop the education program and resources themselves for the sustainability of the program. And I think it is also very important to find appropriate selection of medium or methods of delivery. And the creation of interactive application that can be used on mobile devices like telephone is also very, very important. And finally, we think it is very important that the content is in a language understandable to the target audience here. So in brief, this is what I can share with you for now. Maybe we'll get time to elaborate more in the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Masozera. I'm wondering why I put you under museum perspectives and not under best practices. You have a lot already going, especially with your community outreach, that really could be lesson learned for some of the other museums. So thank you for sharing that, and especially thank you for your recommendations. There's in the chat box, there's a little survey asking how many museums already have distance education. So if the participants can go into the chat and try to fill out the survey, that will be helpful. We're going to move now over to get some teachers' perspectives. So we're very happy to have Dr. Mary Gibert with us. She's a teacher here in Nairobi at the Lycée de Diderot. And she will now give us her perspective on how it's been for her. She's taught all over the world, and how it's been with her working with museums.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I hope you won't mind. I thought I would just have a quick preamble to say that these are obviously challenging times for everyone, but they're particularly complicated for teachers. Because most of us were never trained to teach online. And in many ways, it goes against our philosophy to teach online, because we like to have direct contact with our pupils and know how they're doing and what they understand and what they understand less. And I'd say also that there's a very frustrating feeling coming from the fact that we spend a lot of time trying to make everything online friendly, and have very little to show for it. So basically my message is, any help is very welcome, and any support from museums is more than gratefully acknowledged. Now, there's lots of online material from museums, and I'm very lucky to be in a country that has very good museums in Kenya, and that has put a lot of its material quite recently online with a Google Arts and Culture website, and that's very helpful. One of the challenges we face as teachers, I think, is the sort of having to combine all of that material that's there for us, and the very little time we have to go through it and make sense of it and assess what we can use in our teaching and what might be less helpful in our teaching. And I think that's really one of the challenges and one of the areas where some help would be really helpful. Another, and I'm just going to try and underline a few of these challenges. Another challenge I think we face is that increasingly, so first, a lot of our curricula focus much more on the contemporary era, so 19th and 20th century. And I've noticed that a lot of museums in Africa and in Kenya, for example, tend to focus more on the pre-colonial era and on traditional societies. And that makes it a little bit more difficult for us to use that material and make sense of it in our classes. I also feel that, you know, there's an increasing call on us teachers to decolonize the curriculum and to try and show, you know, African ownership, to show, you know, how African have been actors in their own history. And sorry, there's been very interesting attempts at trying to address that by museums, and recently the National Museums of Kenya have put together a Shujaa exhibition with showing some of the Kenyan heroes, and I think that's really wonderful, but more of that is needed and would be really useful for us teachers. And then a last sort of comment I'd like to make is that beyond the material and contents of the museum, I think we would also learn a lot and value as teachers and pupils a bit of insight into how museums work. How do they curate their exhibitions? Who works? What are the different professions in museums? How do they choose the material they exhibit, and so on? And I think any attempt to basically show the backstages of museums and possibly to also allow pupils to come in and comment on that and bring in their own material and contribute their own thoughts would be really useful to make them actors of museums and make them participate a bit more in the museum making. And I think that's really useful as well, because it's important for pupils to have the feeling that, you know, they are historians in the making and that they are part of their history. So they're just very quick thoughts, you know, based on what I've been doing and on some of the challenges and frustrations. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful to hear your point of view. And I'm very happy that we have Dr. Binyam Sise Mendisu with us from ICBA, who is going to also share the lessons that he's learned from working with teachers across the continent.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Thanks for the opportunity. Happy to be here. Our institute, UNESCO's International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, is a Category 1 institute, and we are mandated to strengthen teacher policy and development on the continent over the last 20 years. And we consider teachers are at the center of any education system. In fact, their role becomes even more significant in times of crisis, similar to the ones that we are in today. And the COVID-19 crisis led both to the closure of schools and museums in Africa and around the world. And we think that schools and museums are important learning institutions. Just like schools, we learn science, history, geography, and so much more in museums. So we believe it's really, really important for the two to work together and to collaborate. Museums, as an important source of information and knowledge, are very important for teachers and for schools, in the sense that they will make learning relevant and they will enrich learning. So we value the collaboration between schools and museums. Our institute, ICBA, has been leading series of weekly webinars to assess the context, to develop response, and to facilitate knowledge exchange over the last few weeks. Next, please. So we wanted to share with you some of the major opportunities that we see and some of the challenges that we note. Let me start with some of the opportunities. I think this crisis have opened some, it has opened our eyes in some ways, and it's really high time that we formally consider not only schools but other centers of teaching and learning, like museums. We feel we are presented with a rare opportunity to bridge between museums and schools, and to really create a learning environment where it's open. It's not only limited to schools, but it also benefits from other learning institutions like museums. That we think is a big opportunity. And second, we believe that I think there has been some of the speakers, the directors that has just mentioned, there has been already some programs which have been up and running in the region. So we don't have to recreate the wheel from scratch. Rather, we have some programs, but probably we have to change the modalities, and we have to go virtually. And the major challenges that we note, there is a little experience and culture among teachers to use museums and other learning alternatives. So that's something that we need to change quickly. And then the second challenge that we see is, I think some of the speakers have mentioned it as well, the visits, the museum education systems are not still considered, they are still considered as extracurricular activities and not the integral part of the curriculum. That may have to change. And the last one is the challenge with infrastructure and the low connectivity that characterizes our continent and schools. Next, please. Next, please. Yes, in terms of recommendation, our institute would be very, very happy to collaborate. We have a network of, we have an experience working for 2 decades on the continent and build the capacity of teachers and teacher educators. We have a network with ministries, with teacher training institutions, with teacher unions. So we'll be very happy to collaborate. Probably 3 points. I think we need to act very quickly to seize the opportunity to rethink and to reform education. And we believe that it's very important to build the capacity of teachers, policymakers, and school leaders, and prepare various toolkits and materials. Finally, it's time to be, in a crisis, there is an opportunity to be creative and to be innovative and to think out of the box. So these are my take for the session. Thank you very much for listening. Over to you, Caroline.
Carolyn, you need to unmute yourself, Carolyn.
Sorry. Okay, so thank you so much for that. I wanted to say, as we're running short on time, we will move now on to a series of 4 speakers who are going to share with us some of the things that they're doing that perhaps we can take inspiration from. So I've been and had the honor and thrill of visiting the Zeitz Museum, and I'm very happy to welcome Ms. Liesel Hartmann to the webinar to share with us her experiences. She has a long experience in museum education, and right now she's also the head of the education department at the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary Art in Africa. So Liesel, it's over to you. Thank you.
so much, Carolyn, for the invitation. It's lovely to be here, and hello to everybody who is out there. I'm going to try and move as quickly as I can with the time that I have. So if we can just move to the next slide, just to show those of you who have not been to the museum what it looks like. And also just to say that my presentation really needs to take a certain amount of contextual factors into consideration. I think the one is that we are still a toddler. The museum is only 2.5 years old, and we are very much in the process of building capacity at the museum and understanding what our broader mission and vision is, which is fairly extensive. Even though we are a museum in Cape Town, we very much see ourselves as a Pan-African institution, and that invites knowledge and inspiration from across the continent and also the diaspora. I think also what I'd like to just bear in mind for my presentation are two kind of guiding principles. The one is around the fact that as a museum we create knowledge and we generate knowledge, and today we'll really be looking at how we've been doing it at the Zeitz-MoCA. And the other principle is one of collaboration, that really from a platform of absolute humility, we understand that we don't have the answers to everything, and that the time ahead, particularly, it's always been like that, but particularly now in a sort of post-COVID society, that we need to work in partnership and in collaboration and support with other institutions, museums, education institutions that help us to achieve our aims. So how do we transmit knowledge at the museum? The one is through exhibition making. Our curatorial and our education department basically work hand in hand, even though we have very separate and discrete functions and tasks on a daily basis. We see ourselves as working together and as one unit and not separate. So exhibition making is important. There's a full schedule across 2 years of what the exhibitions are going to be. But we don't only make exhibitions, we also host exhibitions, and that's something that we've done extensively in the Center for Education. Then around the transmission of knowledge is that, driven by the curatorial department, there is a fair amount of discursive and critical programming linked to specific exhibitions, and that is to really generate that knowledge from various fields, from artists, from creative professionals, from writers, from thinkers across the board, and that's a very critical part of our programming. The next is formal pedagogy. So to remember that as a museum, and our previous presenters have all said that museums are education institutions, so we teach and we train in various ways. We also develop materials, and that's very important, whether that's in the form of cataloging or other things that we do. And then to reiterate that point, that we work in partnership and lots of collaboration with lots of people. So just to unpack some of those a little bit, next slide. So exhibition making and hosting. I've spoken about the fact that there is a full curatorial program where we have exhibitions that are scheduled across 2 years. Obviously with COVID now, those exhibition programs, as I'm sure is the case with lots of museums, has been shifted out and radically disrupted in various ways. We also have education exhibition. In our Center for Arts Education, we've got 2 classroom stroke studios, but those spaces convert and are sometimes exhibition spaces as well as teaching spaces at the same time, and we have exhibitions there by children, young people, emerging artists. We've done various programs, and that invites a particular interest from our audience. So it's not necessarily just the exhibition in the White Cube gallery space, but also exhibitions that point to teaching and exchange and pedagogy in a particular way. And then we've also done our first exhibition for children. That's not an exhibition of artworks by children, but works that have been made by artists for children to interact with and to understand on their level, and that's been a very exciting project. Next slide. So the discursive and critical programs come in various forms. We've had a very successful symposium around the artist William Kentridge, for example, because he's a major artist and sort of international and long career in the arts. We have panel discussions of various kinds. There are public conversations between artists and or curators or creative professionals, and those happen to a lesser or greater degree depending on the particular exhibition and time. We've had various screenings and film screenings, documentaries, that are focused around artistic practice and contemporary practice and artists, and then performances of various kinds across all performing mediums, where it's theatre, whether it's literature, poetry, whether it's music. Next slide. And then our teaching or our pedagogy, like a lot of the museums have said, there's a full, for us, schools and family program, which we run on a daily, weekly, and there are monthly activities linked to that, workshops, tours, holiday programs. So we're very full and we're very busy all of the time. We do a lot of teacher training and support. We work very closely with our education department around that because we like to see our space as the space for inspiration for teachers and also to be really tuned into the needs of the curriculum. We run university courses. Sometimes we co-teach, as we are at the moment, with particular universities around courses that they run. They refer to our content and our information. So there's a real exchange of information and of methodology, and those are very exciting and enriching. And then a museum fellowship program is something that we are very much in the throes of planning and developing at the moment. It's not off the ground yet, but something that we see as very important in our connections with partners across the continent to really train young people in curation and in exhibition making. So a very, very important part of what we see ourselves doing going ahead. Next slide. And then materials development. So with every exhibition, there has to be some kind of publication, whether it's a major catalogue like we've seen with Regent Kentridge and some of the other bigger artists, or whether it's smaller publications, all the exhibition didactics, the curatorial statements, the wall texts, all of those things, and all of those transmit knowledge in different ways and to different audiences. And then in terms of what we do in education, there's educational learning and teaching support materials, or what we call LTSM. So education, publication, and then lesson plans, worksheets, all of the usual material that's created around teaching young people and children. And next slide. Carolyn, I hope I'm doing okay for time. You must just wave at me if I'm not. And then on the issue of partnership and collaboration, and just to say that, and just to express that platform of humility that we are functioning from a lot of the time, is that we really feel we don't know everything and we are learning as much as everybody else is, and also to be generous about what we do, to share what we do. So we've worked with local government around an emerging artists program, which we ran very successfully, and there's going to be a follow-up on that as soon as we can get back into the world in some way, or maybe it's done digitally. We work very extensively with the education department. We've done curriculum intervention for them and teacher training. So we write content into the curriculum, because a lot of contemporary African art doesn't exist in the curriculum, and there isn't really a base of understanding what that is about. And so that's a very exciting opportunity for us. We've hosted exhibitions for the education department and events, major events, provincial events that they've run. And then our community networks, very, very important. Those NPOs, those institutions, individuals that are service providers in arts education. We have a formal partnership with the Lalela after school program. We do a lot of teacher support with many of our networks and our partners, and a lot of public programming around that as well. And just connected to that is that we're doing a conversation with some of them shortly to talk about the sort of challenges ahead for us, where we are so accustomed to working with groups of people in physical spaces, and what that's going to mean for us going forward, bearing in mind that digital or online teaching or sharing is not necessarily the answer to all of the issues or challenges ahead. Next slide. And then transmission beyond the building. So even though we are in a very beautiful building and lots of things happen there, there are definitely things that we need to be thinking of in terms of the future and how we go out. Already we do, but that a lot more field work is necessary to understand our communities and what their needs are. So also from that base of humility, is not going out all guns blazing or whistles blowing and saying, here's this wonderful thing that we've done for you, but to really activate a sense of negotiation and dialogue and conversation about what is needed and what people want of us as a museum. There needs to be a lot more resource development. We're very much in the throes of putting things online and creating more of a digital presence as far as that goes with our programming. Transmitting our content through other forms of media, so but online and in print, but also one of the things we're talking about is community radio. That's something that lots of our communities have access to. You know, people may have smartphones, but there's no access, and data is very expensive, and all of those issues around connectivity that other colleagues have already spoken about. Looking at online models for arts education and what is appropriate, what works, what doesn't, and how children learn digitally and whether learning is the same, and you know what the impact and the outcomes of those things are. Looking at the notion of a mobile museum model, we presented some research a while ago and looked at the kiosk museum from Ghana and that particular model. And then just ongoing research, conferences, publications that need to be done, continental exchange programs. So really our opportunity to be reaching out to our colleagues and saying, what can we do together? What can we learn from each other? And how can we enrich each other's experience? And then digital interactivity, which of course is the buzzword right now, but really looking at how that can be done appropriately with our collections, with our exhibitions, and with our programming in various ways. And that's it from me. Just to end off, I think next slide, with a quote from a colleague who we've worked in partnership so many times, who speaks about our responsibilities as museum educators and professionals, and how we come together at a particular time in history when things come together to present an opportunity for working together in partnership. So just ending off with that quote, which I won't read. I think I'm probably over time, Carolyn, so I'm going to end there.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you so much for sharing all of those innovative programs that you have undertaken in South Africa. So without further ado, Dr. Corinne Forrest, if you're ready, she will share with us some of the innovative education and outreach programs they've developed at the Apravasigat in Mauritius. So over to you, Corinne. You just need to unmute. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. I would like to thank you for inviting us to take part in the webinar to share the experience that we had at the Apravasigat. I'm sorry I don't manage to share my PowerPoint, unfortunately, but I will just, given the time is running, I will just go through key elements that we have experienced in Mauritius. The first one was that the Apravasigat was the first World Heritage Site in Mauritius, and it was talking about the history of indenture, which is a page of history that is not fully known by Mauritians and by tourists coming to visit the island. So we identified this as a first challenge. The second challenge was that the site was fragmentary. So it was difficult when you were visiting the site to understand what the features were before, when the site was an immigration depot. So with these two elements in hand, we thought that we would undertake audience surveys with the visitors coming to the site to better understand what questions do visitors have when they come to visit the site, and what elements are not totally understood by the population, because we know that history in Mauritius is taught only slightly when you're about 11 or 12, and there's no dense modules of national history in the curriculum. So we knew that at some point the World Heritage Site and the museum that we were at that point in time developing would have a significant role to play in the education of children, but also in giving a better information to the Mauritians and to the tourists coming of the history of the site, and in particular the history of indenture that was hardly known, or at least there were some beliefs, but there was no historical fact. So what did we do to develop this museum, and how did the education program came up? Well, we undertook these surveys, and we could see that there were clear features. People didn't want to read much text. They didn't want to have thousands and tons of dates and data and elements that would make the visit long and tedious. So the idea was to have a balanced experience where you would use interactive tools at the same time, having a baseline text that would address a key message, which is why the Apravasygat is a World Heritage Site. That's mainly the red thread that we have followed throughout the permanent exhibition, and also to use visuals. But we thought that we needed more resources and more support to give to the schools in particular, which represent a high number of visitors in May, when the school outings are taking the kids to the interpretation center at Apravasygat. So there's a bit more than 10,000 children coming yearly at the interpretation center. So we knew that we would need to develop a kit specifically for the teachers, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, which was that history is hardly touched. So we thought that we would need to give the children an experience that would really take them back in time for them to understand what's indenture about. And why is it so important in the history of Mauritius? This was really the key points. So we developed a kit for teachers, which gave a brief history so that also teachers could have an update on the latest research on indenture, which are not necessarily easily accessible. And we also developed a general kit for the visitors, so it can be anybody. This kit is in French and English. And for the kit for teachers, we devised it in 3 phases. There's one phase where the teacher has activities proposed to prepare his visit to the World Heritage Site. So he can work in the class with the children on specific items that we suggest in order to prepare the visit. Once they come to the Apravasygat, there's a quiz that the children can fill in, and they need to run around the place to find the answers. And then once they get back to the school, there is still in the kit proposals for activities that the teachers can still undertake with the children, so that they really cover up all the aspect of indenture. So we felt that was really a need for this, was to support the teachers. And we also developed with time tools that are probably more general, like a virtual tour that's accessible on our website, where you can really wander around and visit the Apravasygat from home or from a classroom or with a group of friends. So we try to really address key questions that came up while we were doing these surveys, and even with time and experience, when people visit the interpretation center, we also receive suggestions, ideas that we consider and try to implement as well to improve, obviously, the visitor experience. And I will end up on this last point. We're also very lucky in Mauritius to be a small island and with people who have a lot of energy. So we are very lucky to benefit from the collaboration of colleagues or from the private sector, who also came up regularly in those last years with ideas and with projects that we have set up in partnership with them. So there are a number of films, for example, that are very short, but are very educational, especially for children, but also for the wide public. So they give information on specific themes and aspects, and these films have revealed to be very, very good and very well received by the public. So we also had a policy where we wanted all the tools and films or any support and resources that we have to be accessible to everyone. So all the educational materials are available on our website, which is apravasiga.org. There are also, obviously, we use our Facebook page, especially in this time of confinement. We've been using it quite extensively these last weeks to put materials where people can learn more about the site. So I think we learn every day, obviously, from the visitors and from the school children, and we try to adapt the tools that we develop upon their expectations. I think this is really something that's very important. And maybe what we could do as professionals in the region is to have a common platform, a collective platform that would receive all the materials that we have, because all sites, all museums obviously have developed materials that would be very interesting to consult as professionals, but also for the wide public. I think this type of platform would be really good to share experiences, but also for people to know more about the heritage in the region. I think that's it for me. I hope I was not too long. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Corinne. Yeah, I know we're running short on time, but this is really the important lessons that we want to share. So Jinjia, if you can just show, we have our next speaker is Mr. Darren Milligan. So he's going to share with us some resources and experiences from the Smithsonian Learning Lab in the United States. So we will take off our PowerPoint now, Jinjia, so he can upload his. And we will now listen to Mr. Milligan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. And it's my great pleasure to join you today to be part of this really important and interesting conversation. Again, my name is Darren Milligan. I put my contact information there and would definitely encourage anyone who's interested in the project I'm going to share today to follow up via email or Twitter. I'd love to continue the conversation. The Smithsonian Institution is the world's largest museum, education, and research complex. We were founded in 1846 and are headquartered in Washington, D.C. Our collection has about 150 million objects. Our museums, we have 19 major museums located in Washington, D.C. and New York City, but in addition to the museums, we also have 9 major research institutions across the world, libraries, archives, and a whole series of programmatic offices that focus on particular audiences or particular initiatives. I work for one of those. I work for the Center for Learning and Digital Access, which was established in 1976 to serve public education by bringing Smithsonian collections and expertise into classrooms across the country. And for now more than 40 years, we've published educational materials and provided access to Smithsonian educational resources for classrooms. And to really better understand the needs of teachers and students and museum educators, we've spent the last decade in active experimentation as well as research that culminated in the launch of a new online platform called the Smithsonian Learning Lab. I'm going to share that with you today. The lab arose out of a research-based program designed to better understand teachers and teaching, and to understand how places like museums, ones that we believe are really very well positioned to use technology to ensure equitable access to heritage, could better serve teachers' needs. And since our launch in the Learning Lab is available there at learninglab.si.edu, I'm going to sort of walk you through a bit of a tour of it, but I definitely welcome you to explore it on your own and at your own pace. Since we launched in 2016, our users of the Learning Lab, which includes Smithsonian museum educators, curators, and scientists, but primarily teachers from across the country and around the globe, have developed more than 40,000 examples of how museum resources can be at the core of educational experiences. And these examples range from really experiments to really true models of how museums can support digital learning in every classroom. And the lab is a set of web accessible tools that sit atop all the digital content from across the Smithsonian's museums. Teachers told us, that they definitely appreciate traditional lesson plans around content relevant to them and their students, but that they also need access to the images and the knowledge that were used to construct them. So the first thing you can do on the Learning Lab is to search across currently more than 5 million images, videos, books, blog posts, magazine articles, and websites. And I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of what that looks like now. So if I were to search for a historical figure such as Abraham Lincoln, I'd get a search result here, more than 1,400 objects, photographs, artworks from across the Smithsonian's museums. If I were to select one, such as Abraham Lincoln's watch, I can explore the object. I can read the information that the museum knows about it. I can easily share it. I can use tools to generate citations. This is a tool that grew out of our work with librarians who are really interested in students becoming better digital citizens. But search is really just the beginning. The Learning Lab is a set of tools for creating new examples of learning. And so I could add this watch to a collection of objects that I might be creating and using with my students on a subject like technology. So this is a grouping, an aggregation of objects called a collection. This one was actually made by an elementary school teacher. It was a way to help his young students understand the concept of technology. So his students had a pretty universal misconception that technology really refers to things that you plug in, things that require technology. And so Gary assembled these resources together using the Learning Lab. He used the tools to create interactivity. He aligned it to standards. And then he published this collection on the Learning Lab so that others could find it and use it and personalize it to their own needs. So I did that. I made a copy of Gary's collection here, and you can see at the bottom I've added Abraham Lincoln's watch. My version is going to have a bit more interactivity. So I'm going to show you how to use the tools of the Learning Lab to do that. So on top of Abraham Lincoln's watch, I'm going to add an overlay using the tools of the lab to prompt my students to read the time on the watch. So I'm going to create this overlay. I'm going to use another tool of the lab to build in a quick assessment, a quick quiz into the piece. And then when I publish this back to my students, when they view this version of the watch, you can see in the upper left-hand corner there's a little paper clip with a number 2. When they open this up, they'll see that overlay and they can respond to that quiz with questions coming back to me. So I'd like to share just a few additional Learning Lab collections that users across the world have made to show the impact of how a combination of the tools of a digital tool like the Learning Lab and the resources of the Smithsonian can have in a K-12 environment. So if I were to do another search on the Learning Lab for a phrase like climate change, I'd find another classroom a teacher-created collection. This one's called What Does It Mean to Be Human in the Anthropocene? This collection was made by a high school science teacher and incorporates museum objects, videos, websites, as well as thinking strategies to introduce to her students an interdisciplinary discussion about how humans have lived in the past and how we will live into the future. And finally, to sum up, I'd like to share a couple examples of Learning Lab collections that have been made by museum educators during the current COVID-19 crisis. We've been responding to a lot of different needs, as many museums have over the last several months. One has been to provide resources for caregivers, for parents and families, parents especially who are now both serving the role as parent but also primary educator as their students are home. This is a collection made by the Smithsonian American Art Museum that uses artwork to inspire simple craft activities at home. So in this Learning Lab collection, children are making paper and stick flowers, but using artwork from the collection as their inspiration. In a similar example from our Hirshhorn Museum, our Museum of Contemporary Art, students use, again, inspiration from the collection to make a simple bird feeder. And finally, from the National Portrait Gallery, the museum has converted several of their famous portraits into line art that are downloadable and printable to provide sort of a low-tech or even really no-tech options to create coloring sheets for young children. So here's one from a portrait of First Lady Michelle Obama. And these are really just the tip of the iceberg of the 40,000 examples of the collections that have been made so far. And I would certainly gladly take the rest of the time we have in the event today to show off the amazing work of our users. But I think I'll end with an invitation. The Learning Lab is open to everyone. Teachers, caregivers, students around the world can access and use the lab, but also museums can use the lab. Your museums and your classrooms can take advantage of this tool. We've worked with countless museums in the United States and abroad who are using the free tools of the Learning Lab, the resources from Smithsonian museums, but also uploading their own images, their own collection objects, and their own resources into the Learning Lab. By doing this, you can publish educational initiatives without having to rely necessarily on your own internal technological infrastructure, and we can bring together collections from across the world. So thank you for the time today and for the invitation, and please definitely contact me if you or your museum would like to learn more about using the Smithsonian Learning Lab for your own initiatives. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating to see the possibilities with the Learning Lab. Now we will have Dr. William Deal, who's the coordinator of the online programs. He's a professor of education and coordinator of the online graduate program at Penn State College of Education and the associate editor of the American Journal of Distance Education. So Jinjia, you can take off his slide so he can upload his presentation. And we look forward to hearing from Will now. Thank you for joining us. You just have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you see my slide on the screen?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I've really enjoyed learning about what everyone is doing at their museums. It's wonderful to be here with you. I'm William Deal, and I am an assistant professor at Penn State. My specialty is the field of distance education, and we have graduate programs and certificates that teach people how to set up distance education systems, all aspects of distance education, design, research in distance ed, and how to set up programs. And I thought today, I'll go on to the next slide here. Before I forget to do it, I want to provide you with this URL for the American Center for Distance Education. This center has been around since the 1980s, and we have ongoing series of discussions with distance education scholars from around the world. And I think that this group that's here today would really enjoy some of the presentations. And I also would invite you to please come and present and tell colleagues around the world what you're doing. I really enjoyed hearing your stories today. So I thought the best contribution I could make today is to talk about distance education a little bit. Distance education has been around since there was a penny black stamp and the Postal Service started. So the technologies have changed, but a lot of the methods and the issues that organizations face and that students face and that parents face and teachers and on, they're still the same or very similar. And the technologies have gone from Postal Service to radio, television, World Wide Web. We've heard folks talk about mobile learning today as well. And I would just say that one point I would like to make is it's okay, low tech is okay. It's proven that correspondence education can be effective if it's done correctly. You can use radio, television, and other technologies, and the key is to use these technologies in an effective manner. And there's research since the formal research since the 1970s. So a big point that I'd like to make today is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is research out there that you can turn to. I am very happy to collaborate with anyone who would like to learn more about the field of distance ed. But the main point is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of research out there that talks about best practices. So I'm going to move on. I thought thinking about distance education as a system would be helpful for you as you think about the next steps that you'd like to take. Some other colleagues today have talked about how this is a great opportunity to kind of rethink what you're doing and how to reach people in these times of crisis. And I would just say that I think that we need to be ready to, this is a kind of a new norm that's happening, and we will probably not be going back to a full face-to-face experience all the time. We may have to go back and forth, and we may have to develop hybrid models. And I would encourage people to think ahead and think in those terms. So this first slide is a model that I hope will help you think about as you're brainstorming new ways to work and ways for outreach, to think about these embedded systems. There are global systems in place, social systems. People have talked about social media. There are educational systems around the world, instructional systems, telecommunication systems, software systems, and hardware systems. And what I would suggest is to take a look at this model and to brainstorm in each of these areas and see how you might expand and collaborate with colleagues around the world or even locally in local communities. And then this slide is drilling down on taking a look at a distance education system. And you may not have the resources to use all of these bullet points, but if you can look at this model and think about everything from management all the way down to policy and recruitment and how to evaluate your system, and all the way to your content sources and your program design, how to do that with proven methods that will work using distance education methods, how to deliver. You can use this model for that. And a big part of this is to think about the interaction. There are many people who can be involved in creating interaction in the system so that you can expand it and make it more efficient and higher quality as well. And then the last part is to think about the learning environments that everyone is in. Think about the workplace, the home, classroom. You think about communities where you might expand. Many colleagues are doing this. As I listened, many people are doing this. But I hope that this model will help you kind of brainstorm and think about the various aspects of a distance education system. And then finally, this is a great opportunity, and other colleagues here today have talked about this, but it's a great opportunity to think about community. I'm in the United States outside of Washington, D.C. today, and many of you are miles away from me and vice versa. And this is a great opportunity for global collaboration to really think and expand our thinking about how to get people to reach your particular museums. So I would also think learner-centered. Use your imagination. Draw on the imagination of people in your community and colleagues, and get them involved in your programs. And the last thing I would just say, this is a great opportunity, And I'll put this slide up one more time. I would love to invite you over to the center to collaborate. There are scholars in distance education from all over the world who I know would be very happy to collaborate with you. We have people who are a part of the center who are instructional designers. We have teachers, many people who are very excited about online learning and distance education. So again, thank you very much. This was a great opportunity to be here, and I wish everyone well and good health. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing all of these tips with us. We're really grateful for your time and for joining us for this webinar to share your insights, all of you, Liesl and Corinne and William and Darren. Now, without further ado, I will pass the microphone over to Terry Niambi from ICOM, based in Zambia. So Terry, if you unmute your mic, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Kara. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a very important meeting for all of us. And I must say that although I'll be talking about resources here, but the greatest resource that we have as a community that is dealing in museums or whether in the teaching fraternity is our network. That's the greatest resource, and I'm sure every one of us that has been in this meeting, we have learned so much from each other. And here I'm going to just mention in brief, and you could have time to look at other resources that we may use as museum professionals, as teachers, and all those that get involved in heritage and museums work wherever we are. One of the things that we have already under UNESCO that has been done together with ICOM, which is the International Council of Museums, is a museum studies training package. And this would be very important, especially for African colleagues working for museums. Most of us do not have opportunities to undergo museum studies, and there are resources that are there that we can use for us to empower ourselves as museums and heritage professionals. And others are resources that have been made available, are movable heritage outreach programs, and these also are materials that you can find, especially on the UNESCO website too, and the UNESCO 2015 recommendation. And this was a very great recommendation that was done, and ICOM also did greatly do some work in coming up with this particular recommendation, and it is good for museums. I know most museums professionals have not looked at this document. I'm sure our colleague Caroline will have an opportunity to share with all of us. Please let's take time and read this. It's a very important document for ourselves. And there is also another resource that you can tap into, the reorg program, which is very important for museums, and it is great, especially for the groups, for museums that have challenges, especially in the areas of conservation, and we want to have our collections good. We had a teacher already here who says that we must show the backstages of our museum. So we must have our collections good so that we can show this to teachers and pupils. And this is one of the learning resource that is there, especially for museums. Next slide, please. And so we are here in COVID-19 situation, and we have a different situation, and it's not a normal situation. And so ICOM, the International Council of Museums, has provided guidelines on how to reach and engage our public remotely. There is a link that is there, and you are free as museum professionals to use this particular guide, and especially for us as African museum professionals, to see what guidelines are there and how we can engage our communities out there. Most of us have already shared. We do great programs. I have heard from museums in East Africa, many interesting programs we're doing, but maybe sometimes beyond the physical interactions, it becomes very difficult in the COVID-19 situation. And so we have those resources that are there on the ICOM website, and for more materials regarding learning about museology and so on, we have under ICOM an international committee called ICTOP that is there and has a lot of resources that we can also learn from. And we also still have under ICOM another committee for education and cultural action called SECA, also has a lot of materials that we can learn from, especially as museums in the education departments, and see how what good practices are there of how to engage in education. And there, beyond UNESCO, ICOM, there are many other institutions that have many great learning programs. We have heard of the Smithsonian Institute, the Learning Lab that has just been presented, which is great. And beyond that, we have also some colleagues. And in the American Alliance of Museums, I would encourage all of us to visit the American Alliance of Museums. Has a wide range of resources, such as how to engage with audiences and what other museums around the world are doing to engage audiences, not physically, but virtually. And there is, in that particular link that I have given, a lot of museums listed there and what exactly they're doing, and we could learn something out of it as African museums specifically. Not that we can take everything, but it can help for us to think through what other things we could do in order to for us to engage our communities. Next slide, please. So, as a colleague has already said from our friend and colleague from Rwanda, he also did mention, in connection to what I have to say, there is no one model that suits all countries equally. Each museum in the world is unique in its own way, and therefore there is no best way that we can prescribe for museums to interact with their communities that are not within them, to provide a service to them. But it is imperative on us as museums to see which is the best way forward, how we can engage our communities, looking at our challenges like we have mentioned already, and the opportunities that are there. Find a niche as a museum where you can explore and engage your community out there. So I wish you well, all of you, and stay safe and stay away from COVID-19 as much as you possibly can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Now I'm very honored to hand the floor over to one of my role models, Dr. Professor George Abungu, who I know we are running out of time, but he will still engage in a few question and answer that have either been raised in the meeting chat. Maybe Jinjia, you can go to the next slide. And if someone has a question, please put it in the chat. Although we don't have, you can go to the next slide, Jinja. We don't have enough time for a lot, but we will see what we can do to at least have a small exchange. So over to you, George. You go to the next slide, Jinji, I think.
Thanks, Dara, for that. I know people are exhausted. This thing actually makes me quite exhausted, but it's also very beneficial. Let me first of all start by thanking everybody for attending this meeting. I know there are people all the way from the Caribbean to West Africa. We have so many French-speaking colleagues I've seen. This is the largest probably number of colleagues I've seen with a virtual meeting like this, from Rome all the way to Mauritius and other places, South Africa. So thank you very much. Well, I'll be very quickly, just maybe 2 minutes of a little comments, and then after that, I will open the floor so that we can start a bit of discussion. Now, the main issues here are that, first of all, the International Museum Day talks about digital inclusion, and I think that's one of the reasons why we are here, because they've realized it's important in the current world. The question of distance learning, education programs, and resources. So 2 different things that we have been talking about, and I'm very glad that a lot of recommendations have come out. The question of availability of national, regional, and global resources for these kinds of activities, that we need to look at those, so that with that we can be able to start planning. Now, a good thing is that for decades, African museums have championed the role of museums in the lives of communities. So this is really not new. They have been engaged, and other parts of the world have really learned from the African examples. There have been some fantastic examples of programs. I can't mention all of them, but I can mention very quickly, like the Zebra on the Wheel that we've had in Botswana for years. I know a colleague there, Tiki Pule, played a major role there. The Village Museum, I was very happy when the director of the Tanzania Museum was talking, with Paul Musemwa, a colleague also working very hard, plus his colleagues, some of them are late. We've also had at home here the Young Researchers Club, which was very, very powerful. And I know Lorna Bungu, Elizabeth Ouma, David Mbudia, Linda Mboya, and others who are communicating here were very critical in developing, plus many others. And I think that we should try to look at some of those ones and see how we go. It comes at a very critical time, the time of COVID-19. We need to be able to show our relevance. We need to create a niche in this competitive world with a new order and new normals that maybe 3-4 months ago were things that were abnormal. So we need to see how we fit into that when we are discussing this distance learning. The role of digital connectivity, digital availability are things that we cannot take for granted. People have mentioned the question of similarities, the uniqueness of and the local versus the global. We need to look into this while looking at partnerships. How do we continue to partner with our partners in different parts of the world at a global level, at a regional level, at a continental level, and at a national level to be able to move on with this? The role of training and training institutions, I think this is very, very important. Having been a teacher also at a university, I did realize the lack of museum training in Africa, particularly in education. We have to go to Leicester or somewhere else if you want to do that. And it comes with these benefits, but also some of it comes with its challenges. So what do we do that we involve university professionals? I know Vijaya Tilok, probably from University of Mauritius. I know Shahid from University of Western of Cape Town are probably listening. This is a challenge for them. And we would like also to hear their views on what they need to do. A number of issues like low-tech options for teachers, competence-based learning, network and partnership, developing relations, building apps, different kinds of apps have cropped up. And I believe that all this together, we cannot discuss in 10 minutes or in 15 minutes. We need to think about them. And I believe through Kara's office and the director's office, we will be able to put recommendations that will be sound, that can see us move through this very, very important meeting and through this very important process. So with those few remarks, just to jog our minds, I would now like to open up the discussion, at least maybe for 10 minutes. So please, if you have a question, ask the question. Don't go into long stories the way I've done. Just ask the question and let us respond to it. So any questions, any comments?
To ask a question, you have to unmute yourself.
And any of us could take the question if you have the answers. We could take that. Or if you have a comment, I know some people have been putting their comments on writing. We will take those ones up. But it will be interesting to hear other comments. Is there anybody who has a comment, maybe from another place? I'm told that there are few people with comments. There's a colleague from Comoros who wanted to share an example very quickly in 1 minute, if he's there.
Professor Abungu.
Yes.
Robert Masozera.
Yes, Ambassador. Continue, my brother. Yes.
Yes, I want to, just one question. Actually, I was very much interested in the presentation made by Mr. Dalen Milligan from Smithsonian Learning Lab. I want to ask him if is there a way to have a joint kind of project between the lab in Smithsonian Institution with an African museum? Because like in Rwanda, we are really much interested in having a kind of a partnership, but having something similar in Africa. So thank you very much.
Yes, that's a very straightforward question in Rwanda and also in the continent.
Yes, sure.
Okay, the Smithsonian, could we get a comment on that, please? If you are there. Anybody from the Smithsonian? They have all disappeared. Okay.
Just to remind that you have to, they have to unmute to speak. They have to unmute their mic. But I know that at the end of his presentation, he did reach out and say that they were interested in collaborating.
Okay. Okay. Then in that case, then we will get their comments later. Can we move to the next one? If Ambassador, you don't mind, we will come back to that.
All right.
Any other comments or any questions on these very rich presentations that we've had? I've seen very good comments coming in. People asking questions whether we can have a regional cooperation partnership and so on. Comment from universities?
Joke, Madud Joke here.
Yes, Joke.
Just a quick question about those places like South Sudan, where I come from, who don't have physical museums. If mobile museums and or virtual museums, I'm very much interested in the idea of a virtual museum. And what is the best way to go about doing this short of resources?
Can someone, I think, Corinne, you probably would comment on that based on your presentation on maybe some of the things that are Pravasigat and people do in Mauritius. But I think that's a very good question. We know South Sudan has a very rich area, but of course you've had quite a number of challenges, and I know you're looking forward to setting up a museum. You have a fantastic archive, and if there are any comments, I would also suggest that we all think about South Sudan, how we can cooperate at a regional and continental level within Africa itself.
Correct.
Corinne, do you have any comments?
Regarding collaboration, I think it's yes, it's always the key question. I think it's very important to exchange and share, and this is one thing. The key and the critical issue is to find out how, especially in this time of COVID, where we don't really know how the traveling situation is going to be, and it's taking us to think of other ways. So I really think that digital technologies and the time of COVID is giving us this opportunity to be creative and to think of new ways. So I really think that the platform where we could exchange materials, but also maybe there could be exchange of contact details among professionals and experts. There could be also a chat forum or similar discussion areas. I think that's very important and also very challenging because it's always difficult to be far away. I'm very happy to see you, George. It's been a long time, and I'm happy to see you on the screen.
Very happy to see you.
But still,
Okay.
You're very far away. So
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay. Now the question here also goes further. Visual cooperation. Any other comment? Maybe from UNESCO? This is a very critical area. South Sudan is the newest member of the African Union. It has the same challenges as all others. It needs a museum. It's got an opportunity to do something that no other country has done. Does it have to continue following the same traditional way that we do museums, or maybe they can be able to do something different? These are issues that maybe could be raised.
Those are really good points. I know that we have our partner, ICBA, who has another webinar after this and who is scheduled to give the closing remarks. So I think maybe what we can ask participants is that they put their questions in the chat and we can try to consult the different panelists if we're not able to provide the reply, and we can include that in the summary of the meeting that we will share with everyone. But I know for South Sudan, we have an office in Juba, and I know that it's one of our #1 priorities. We're working with the Ministry of Culture there to help them create a museum that responds to the 21st century and that responds to the needs and the priorities of the communities.
Okay, I think with that, Caroline, we've had quite a long, discussion. A lot of things have come. We look forward to now the conclusion before we wind up everything. But I think that we should go that way. We cannot go into recommendation now. There are so many, they are so good, and we'll put them all together and we'll get back to every participant. But it's really a pleasure seeing everybody's name and your contribution. We look forward to your contribution. And with that, those few remarks, I think I turn it back to Caroline. And just thank you once again, all of you, for fantastic webinar.
Thank you so much, George. And Jinjia, you can put the next slide, please. And the next one, and we can hand over the microphone. I hope Yumiko is still here. I know she has another webinar starting. Yumiko?
Thank you, Caroline. No, I don't have another webinar. I have another meeting, but this was too good to stop because this is a very unusual topic, a museum and the teachers, but I'm sure you agree with me that the webinar was very informative and very inspiring. I work for ICBA for teacher development, and I'm personally also a great fan of museums. Art museum, natural history museum is actually my favorite. And when I was visiting the United States, I went to Smithsonian Institute every single day while I was in DC. So museums are great resources. And we realized that the museums have already ongoing programs like the Smithsonian's Learning Lab. But also I've realized that during the COVID-19 school closure, school and the lockdown, a lot of museums in the world have extended education programs and virtual tours. If you go to any of the websites, you see the virtual tours. Now there's a Mona Lisa virtual tour in the Louvre Museum. The exhibition I couldn't go, but now I can see at least some of it in virtually. So museums are great opportunities for teachers and children to learn. And also we have learned very innovative ideas on museums in schools and museums in community. And these are also excellent ideas where children and teachers learn how to curate, which is a very, very creative way of learning lots of things. And then also these museums make us proud of our own heritage, our own culture, and then also our own history. So museums can promote lifelong learning, which UNESCO promotes very much. So this COVID-19 school closure made us realize schools and the learning is much more than just education, and learning is not just in the school premises. We can do much more and using resources like museums. So I am really grateful for this opportunity. I learned a lot and I enjoyed a lot. Now finally, we have to put our voices together to ask our governments in the continent to make internet available for our schools and for teachers and for children. With the internet, we can do so much, but without it, it is so frustrating. So this is something maybe we can put our voices together. And Caroline, thank you very much for this session. I think there is a lot of interest and a lot of good recommendations. We might want to do a second webinar where we might do a small write-up, a policy brief for everyone to share. Anyways, thank you very much for this opportunity. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Yumiko. I know when we were planning this, you had suggested I break this down into 2 webinars because we really tried to give so many voices in one. So I just want to apologize to everyone that we ran over time, but thank all of you for your patience, for joining us. We are really excited to work with all of you on the project proposal that we're developing for the region. And we will share the summary of the discussions today with all of you. And we've also recorded the webinar, and we'll make that available on the UNESCO Nairobi Facebook page. So you can look for the recording there, and I'll also share the link for the recording with all of you in the report summary. So if you have not registered in advance for this webinar, please send us your email so we can be sure to share things with you. So just to close, I'd like to thank all of the panelists. It was really interesting to hear the variety of perspectives, and I wish everyone to stay safe during the COVID. And I look forward to seeing you all as soon as possible. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Carolyn. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Patience. That was great.
Thank you.